Welcome to a new episode of the Opening Bid Podcast. I'm Yahoo Finance Executive Editor Brian Sozzi. This is the podcast that will make you a smarter investor and a better leader. Now, look, there's no shortage of concerns top of mind amongst investors right now. We have tariffs, we have DOGE being DOGE, we have a potential government shutdown, lots of things that are contributing to drive the markets lower here in March. I want to bring in our very special guest here for this episode. This is someone literally on the front lines of dealing with all these issues that are converging at once. That is the Republican Senator from Texas, Ted Cruz, joining me on Opening Bid. Senator, it's great to see you. It has been a while. Thanks for making time for us. I know you're a busy guy, so thank you for doing this. Look, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on, to say the very least, in D.C. Let's start with the government shutdown. How likely is it that we get one?
I think it's probably not going to happen. I think we're going to see the Democrats cave. We're right now at a strange chapter of time. And look, I think the whole country saw it illustrated graphically during the State of the Union address, where I think President Trump gave a fantastic address. He laid out his agenda. He laid out what's been accomplished in the first 7 weeks, which has already been extraordinary. And we saw the Democrat Party just angry, refusing to stand, refusing to clap. It's the first time in the history of the country that we've seen half the Congress refuse to applaud for the President of the United States, refuse to applaud for anything. And I think when it comes to the shutdown right now, the House of Representatives has passed a continuing resolution that would fund the government. And the Democrats right now, they are so angry, they hate Trump so much that they are, as you and I are speaking, the Democrats are still at their lunch. It's the middle of the afternoon. They're apparently screaming at each other. Reporters are sitting outside the lunch, hearing the screaming through the door. And I think at the end of the day, after all of the rage, you're going to see the Democrats finally say, okay, we're not going to shut the government down. But on the other hand, maybe their rage is so much that they have to force a shutdown just to satisfy the really angry left-wing base.
Senator, do the Republicans have to bend it all to avert a shutdown?
Look, the Republicans have bended. We're voting for a continuing resolution to fund the government. I mean, there's nothing attached to this beyond continuing the funding of the government. Now listen, the Democrats on any shutdown fight, that their strategy historically is blame the Republicans for the shutdown. And a lot of times the corporate media is complicit in that messaging. In this case, I think that's pretty much impossible because all or just about all of the Republicans are going to vote to fund the government. And if it fails, there will be only one reason, which will be if the Democrats block it. In the Senate, you got to have 60 votes. We only have 53 Republicans, which means we need at least 7 Democrat votes. If the Democrats decide to all vote no, they'll force a shutdown. But even when the media are being complicit in misleading the voters, it's very hard to characterize the Democrats as somehow not the ones shutting the government down if they're the ones voting to shut the government down.
If, let's just say there's a kumbaya moment, the government does not get shut down, what do the budget cuts look like?
Well, look, that will come, but on the face of this, that's not in this bill. This bill is simply a continuing resolution that continues the current funding. So we will see in the coming months that the Senate is in the process and the House is in the process of taking up what is called budget reconciliation. And budget reconciliation, the reason it matters is it's the principal exception to the Senate filibuster rule. The Senate filibuster rule requires 60 votes to take up legislation. Budget reconciliation is the biggest exception to that, and it lets you move legislation with just 50 votes. We're going to use budget reconciliation to secure the border. We're going to use it to rebuild the military. We're going to use it to unleash American energy, and we're going to use it to extend the 2017 tax cuts. All of that is going to take some time, but I think we'll get it done. I think all of that is delivering on the mandate that came from the voters in November. And I think as part of that bill, I hope we see real and meaningful budget cuts as part of that bill. But that's not this bill right now, which is why the Democrats they're in the middle of the stages of grief, and they're somewhere between denial and anger right now.
Senator, I got a question from a relatively sophisticated investor recently on these shutdowns, and it was very simple. Why do they continue to happen? I mean, it seems like these things pop up over the past decade with consistency.
Yeah, so it's by design, actually. It's by design of congressional leadership. So I've long supported legislation called the Government Shutdown Prevention Act. And it's legislation that says if Congress doesn't vote to fund the government, that you get an automatic continuing resolution that continues in place so you don't have a shutdown. And unfortunately, leaders in both parties block that because it is these shutdown crises that become opportunities to ram their agenda through. If we have a shutdown, look, the reason a shutdown occurs, and it's important to note, a shutdown is not a shutdown of everything. It's a partial government shutdown. If Schumer and the Democrats force a shutdown, it will be a partial shutdown. So what continues? What continues are mandatory spending, so things like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, those continue just like they did before. And also what continues are essential government services. So things like the military will continue to defend the nation regardless of whether the Democrats force a shutdown. Things like critical law enforcement, that continues. But some significant percentage of federal government employees, if there's a shutdown at midnight Friday night, will be told to stay home and not come into work. And I'll tell you, by the way, it'll be interesting to see if the Democrats force a shutdown, if they actually cut off the paychecks for our military, for our Coast Guard. Previously, when Schumer's forced a shutdown, he has, for example, held Coast Guardsmen hostage. I've gone to the Senate floor to try to push through legislation to pay the men and women of the Coast Guard, and the Democrats have objected because they like using a shutdown to make it painful. I hope they don't do that here. As I said, I think they're going to end up caving. I don't think we'll see a shutdown. But at the end of the day, it's going to come up with what the Democrats decide.
Senator, and some folks I've talked to suggest if once we get beyond this, whatever the outcome is, let's just say the government is not shut down. Nobody wants to see this. That is the opening for more budget cuts from Elon Musk and DOGE. Do you share that view?
Well, listen, that's going to happen regardless. And I got to say, I am incredibly encouraged by what Elon Musk and DOGE are doing. I think President Trump ran on limiting wasteful spending, limiting waste, fraud, and abuse. And it really does show what a remarkable place the Democrats are in right now. Elon is discovering some shocking waste, fraud, and abuse. $2 million going to sex change surgeries in Guatemala. Now, tell me, what American taxpayer wants your taxes going to pay for sex change surgeries in Guatemala or going to pay for airing Sesame Street in Iraq? And those are the sorts of waste, fraud, and abuse that are being canceled. And it's interesting, the Democrats are defending all of that. Every wasteful spending that is happening, they're defending it all. And it just is, I think they're in denial about the election. It's remarkable. I don't see my Democrat colleagues. Normally, when you lose an election, you have a period of reflection. You say, okay, what happened? Why did the voters decide differently than my party would like? I don't see the Democrats doing that at all. And we saw, for example, just a week ago in the Senate, we had a bill to prohibit boys and girls sports. Now that was a big issue in the election. It was a big issue in my race and a lot of other races. Every single Democrat voted no. Now, that is literally an 80-20 issue, if not a 90-10 issue. The Democrats are on the wrong side of the overwhelming majority of the American people, and yet it seems they're not listening to the voters.
Has Elon overreached?
I don't think so at all. I think he's doing incredible work. I am grateful for the work he's doing. And I think it is amazing. So we saw at the State of the Union, Democrats holding up signs saying things like Elon steals. And it's this bizarre argument. So their argument is nobody elected Elon Musk. Well, that's true of every single person in the executive branch other than the president and vice president. By the way, under Joe Biden, the entire White House staff, nobody elected them. Under Barack Obama, the entire White House staff, nobody elected them. The entire cabinet, nobody elected them. In the executive branch, there are only two individuals that are elected by the people, the president and vice president. And what's bizarre about the Democrats' argument is they had no problem with Democrat presidents appointing officials to carry out their agenda. Well, that's exactly what Elon Musk is doing. But in this instance, I think we're incredibly fortunate. Listen, Elon is someone I know well. He's a Texan now. He's moved his company to Texas.
He has a big presence. Big presence in Texas, right?
Very big presence in Texas. And by any measure, Elon is one of the most extraordinary business leaders our country has ever produced. He is brilliant, and he has demonstrated this aptitude for founding and building incredibly successful companies, one after the other, from Tesla to SpaceX to the Boring Company. And it's remarkable. Let's take something like SpaceX. A couple of months ago, I went with Elon, I went with President Trump down to a Starship launch down in Boca Chica. Boca Chica is at the southern tip of Texas. 5 years ago, Boca Chica was literally just an empty beach. There was nothing there. And in 5 years, Elon has built a city. He has built a factory that is constructing a brand new rocket ship every single month, and with precisions down to literally a tenth of a millimeter. And he's generating jobs, he's generating innovation. It's extraordinary. And what a blessing for the American people to have one of the greatest business leaders in history coming and giving his time free of charge to root out waste, fraud, and abuse in our government. I'm grateful for it. I think Texans and many, if not most Americans are.
Do you think he has too much power?
I don't think he has enough. I think he is working hard. What an odd statement. Is it too much power to find fraudulent expenditures? I'll tell you some of the things Elon's described. I sat down with him just a few days ago. He walked through, for example, agencies where they went and asked, all right, how many computer subscriptions do you have, say, to different software packages? And they found agencies that had, say, 15,000 employees and 30,000 software subscriptions. So double the number of subscriptions as employees. That's obvious waste. No one had thought to cancel it. No one had thought to stop paying for it. They looked at government agencies and said, all right, how many government credit cards are in these agencies? And they found agencies where you had many more credit cards than you have employees. You look at the government accounting system, one of the things Elon's described. The government accounting system has a block to put the purpose of an expenditure. So as Treasury is sending out trillions of dollars, there's an accounting block to say, what is the purpose of each expenditure? The vast majority of those purpose fields are left blank. USAID had a rule, they left them blank across the board. As Elon pointed out, and listen, he has run and is running multiple public companies. He said if any public company did its accounting the way the federal government does, the officers would all be put in jail. It makes it almost impossible to figure out even where the money is going for. And so I'm very grateful that he's bringing some real accountability to government spending. I think in doing so, President Trump is following through on his promises to the voters.
Senator, hang with us. We're going to go off for a quick break. We'll be right back on Opening Bid. All right, welcome back to Opening Bid. Having a great chat here with the Republican senator from Texas, Ted Cruz. Senator, just lastly on Elon, I mean, what are the optics in your view? I mean, you've been in government for a long time. What are the optics of turning on your TV and you see Teslas in front of the White House while we're trying to figure out a government shutdown? I mean, what does that look like to you?
Well, it looks very similar to the optics when you turn on the TV and saw an electric Jeep in front of the White House with Joe Biden in it. It's a very odd look. The reaction of Democrats to President Trump, for a long time, we've seen what's been widely referred to as Trump derangement syndrome, where they hate him and they can't see straight. It's driven them really to crazy extremes. Well, there's a new version of that now. And it's called Elon derangement syndrome. And likewise, they just hate his guts. Now, the irony is a few years ago, Elon was a hero of the left. When he had the biggest electric car company in the world, they loved him. But once he actually started speaking out and they discovered that he wasn't a wild-eyed socialist, they've turned on him. And you're seeing leftists targeting and trying to punish Tesla. And so I'm glad President Trump decided, you know what, he was going to buy a Tesla out of his own pocket. I'm glad he was doing so because I got to say, Elon is making a sacrifice for the country, and the left hates Trump and Elon so much that they're trying to punish him. And I think President Trump was trying to counterbalance that.
Senator, one of the cool things in my case, and I talked to a lot of CEOs, and what they've been consistently telling me the past few weeks is that this tariff policy is chaotic. Now, that's their words. That's not me pulling things out of thin air. Has it become too chaotic? And then secondarily, do you view tariffs as good or bad for the economy?
Well, look, there's no doubt there has been some uncertainty. And Brian, I'll say when I talk to business leaders, the most consistent question I get from them is what's going to happen on the tariff front. So I understand that uncertainty, and I think it'll take some time to have a clearer picture of what the exact tariff landscape is going to look like. What I will say is this. Number one, President Trump uses tariffs for multiple purposes. One of the purposes he uses them for is as an incentive to incentivize other countries to act in America's interest. I think the clearest example of that is the threatened 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada. And there, President Trump has been explicit. He is using that to try to incentivize Mexico and Canada to assist in securing our border. Now, in that objective, I emphatically agree. We have seen over the last 4 years over 12 million illegal aliens flood into this country. Joe Biden and the Democrats' open borders have done real damage to America, to national security, to public safety. Their policies of just letting go murderers, rapists, violent gang members, I think was one of the big reasons we saw such an overwhelming election result in November is the American people want the border secured. And so I fully support the president using the threat of tariffs to incentivize Mexico and Canada to help secure the border. Now, that being said, my home state of Texas does an enormous amount of trade with Mexico and Canada. I don't want to see the long-term economic policy being big tariffs against Mexico and Canada. And so my hope is that those policies stay as an incentive rather than an ongoing feature of economic policy. Now, let me say secondly, President Trump also likes tariffs. He's been very vocal about this. This has been perhaps the most long-standing policy commitment Donald Trump has had. You go back to the 1980s when Ronald Reagan was president. Donald Trump was advocating then for tariffs. He describes how we've all heard him say he thinks tariff is the most beautiful word in the English language. I can tell you, Brian, what I've urged the president more broadly on tariffs and trade policy. It's clear in the next 4 years, we will see more tariffs than we had the previous 4 years. What I've urged him is two things. Number one, focus on China. I have said for a long time that China poses the greatest geopolitical risk to the United States over the next 100 years. And so I want to see our economy de-link from China. And I think tariffs can be a tool to accelerating that process to onshoring jobs that have gone to China or nearshoring jobs that have gone to China. And then secondly, what I've urged the president to do is focus on reciprocity. And the reason I've urged reciprocity is listen, I believe in free trade. And I want a ratchet, a built-in ratchet towards lower tariffs. And the virtue of reciprocity is if President Trump imposes tariffs on a foreign country and the foreign country doesn't like those tariffs, they have a ready solution to that, which is lower the tariffs they're putting on U.S. goods, which will in turn lower our tariffs. So those are the two things I hope the president does, but we will see over the coming weeks and months.
Your state has been one of the fastest growing in the nation, Senator. I mean, I think of what's happened in Austin. I mean, I know what Elon's been building in the country. I mean, the big tech boom in your state. But are you worried that tariffs trigger a mild recession? And I ask you this because the president didn't rule that out. And I think that is what has the market spooked a bit.
Listen, I think we're going to see enormous economic growth, and I think we're going to see enormous prosperity. If you look at what's coming out of this new administration, one of the things we're seeing is an end to the federal government's war on energy. One of the drivers of inflation the last 4 years was under Joe Biden and the Democrats, the federal government waged a war on American energy and waged a war on Texas oil and gas in particular. That war on American energy ended on January 20th. And I think we're going to see energy production rise. We're going to see America once again being the world's dominant superpower when it comes to oil and gas and energy. That is going to lower prices, not just for energy, but for everything else, because energy is an input to every other cost. I think we're also going to see, and we're already seeing, enormous regulatory reform, a reduction in job-killing regulations. I think that's going to spur growth. And finally, I think we're going to see Congress extend the Trump tax cuts and make them bigger and bolder. That's going to help small businesses and job creation. So I'm very optimistic about economic growth. I think that's one of the major things we were elected to fight for small businesses and to fight for jobs.
Let me switch gears just a little bit. I know you've been focused on what is put out there from big tech companies and then potentially not letting or getting the conservative voice out there. Take us through some of your views on this, and where does your, I guess, views stand today?
I think that big tech censorship poses the single greatest threat to free speech in our country and the single greatest threat to free and fair elections. And so I have been leading the fight in the Senate to end big tech censorship. As you know, I'm the chairman of the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. Commerce Committee has jurisdiction over roughly 40% of the U.S. economy, including all of tech, all of telecommunications, AI. And so one of the real priorities of the Commerce Committee will be fighting big tech censorship. Just in the past week, I've met with multiple big tech CEOs. We are going to engage in oversight, and we are going to fight to ensure that you have free speech, to ensure that you have the right to express your views and not be silenced invisibly by big tech overlords.
Sarah, some of these big tech companies, they've pulled back on DEI. I think what Mark Zuckerberg has done over at Meta. But for the non-tech companies, like those rest of the companies that make up the Fortune 500, should they fear DEI programs under this administration?
Well, they should stop violating the law. And I do think we're seeing big business. Look, big business, particularly under Joe Biden and the Democrats, went woke. And I think it was a real mistake. In my time in the Senate, I've written 4 books. The most recent book was entitled Unwoke: How to Defeat Cultural Marxism in America. And it outlined major institutions in America, one after the other, that had been seized by the radical left. And so it started with universities, went through K through 12 education and journalism and big business and big tech. And I have separate chapters on each of those. And I think we saw a lot of big business go woke. And I think this last election was a repudiation of that. People don't want to be canceled for their speech. They don't want to be canceled for speaking out. And I'll tell you what, people don't want government, they don't want universities, and they don't want business discriminating based on race. And DEI is a racist elevation of racial discrimination above merit. And I think we saw a real repudiation of this in the last election. So I'm glad we're seeing some of big tech moving away from that, and I think the rest of corporate America is too. And by the way, discrimination based on race is against American civil rights laws, and so part of the reason corporations are moving away from it is I think you'll see the Trump administration enforce those laws, and if you violate the laws and discriminate on race, there are real consequences for that.
All right, I think we're out of time here. I know you're a busy guy. We'll have to continue this conversation at some point again soon. Senator Ted Cruz from Texas, always a treat to get some time with you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian.
All right, that's it for the latest episode of Opening Bid. Be sure to hit us with those 5 stars on the podcast platforms and thumbs up on YouTube. Appreciate all the feedback. I try to personally answer all your questions. We'll talk to you soon.